Now, in this evaluation, the focus is going to be on skills. This is meant to evaluate not only like how many mistakes you're making in theory, but really just where your, I guess, the separation of you from your opponents, right? The edge that you're generating in these areas of the game. So the rating scale here, I wrote both confidence and mistakes. When I say mistakes, again, it could be theoretical, or you could just think of this as an exploitative framework where you're just rating yourself against your competition. So the purpose of this section is to evaluate where your execution could improve. And if your execution could improve, this is sort of the areas of focus that I would put into your training regimen. So if this doesn't make total sense to you quite yet, continue working through the course. Once you fill out these evaluations and tie things together in the study section, it's going to make a lot more sense what I'm talking about with applying different techniques or different study methods to address these different issues. But for now, the main point is to distinguish between like your understanding of these areas and your skill set in these areas. So in this first section, I'm asking about technical mastery, which is sort of about like your theoretical ability to play these situations. So in this area, I want you to rate yourself on, if you were playing a machine, if you were playing against like a poker engine, how well would you be rated in these areas? How technically proficient do you think you are in these areas? And again, it doesn't really matter if you score yourself perfectly here. If I was, to evaluate myself in these areas, I think I would do very well pre-flop. I think I would do well, but not quite as well in single raise pots. I think in 3-up pots, I would struggle. And I think in multi-way pots, I would play pretty well. This is just a reflection of, the distribution of training time that I've spent in these areas. And high pressure spots. So this is starting to get more qualitative. I tag this as MTT, but this could happen in cash games if you occasionally play bigger stakes or if you occasionally play in situations where it just feels different. I am asking for a self-evaluation on how good your performance is in those situations. So I think that in high pressure spots, I'm reasonably comfortable, although I certainly don't think I play perfect. And in rare or unusual spots, so this is like the hard to define, hard to train areas. The idea would be how well can you solve this on the fly, right? Like how technically proficient can you be in a spot that you've never studied before? I think this is I labeled it advanced. I think this is an advanced skill set, but something to be aware of about yourself. Because if you're not excelling in these areas, there's probably a theoretical gap hiding somewhere below the surface that's holding you back from these areas. I actually think this is one of my strong suits. So again, if you rated yourself lower than a 3, take note of why. And then we get to consistency. So consistency in execution, this is about how often you're playing at your personal best. So this is not about technical mastery. You can get a 5 here, even if you are not skilled in this area. But I want you to think about how strongly you can execute at a high level. You might call this A game. You might just call this precision. But how consistently can you hit these areas of the game? And are they different from each other for whatever reason? So I would say that my pre-flop consistency is very high. I think that my single raise pot consistency is very high. And that's because I have like heuristics and rule sets that I'm following in these areas that are pretty easy for me to replicate situation after situation. Now in 3-bet pots or in multi-way pots, there's more variables, right? There's more going on. And I would say that my consistency in executing these pots is weaker, for sure. Now, multi-way pots, not so bad. I have some pretty simple rules of thumb that I follow in these areas. But in 3-bet pots, I think it's not so clear. I'm being intentionally critical, right? Like I want to find the areas where I could improve. And I think that this is probably none of these are poor, but I think this is one where I could be a lot more consistent. Now it's interesting here. I think for high pressure, rare, unusual spots, I'm really getting into the mental game aspect of execution. If I'm thinking about how consistently do I play in high pressure spots, actually, my recent experience is that my focus is pretty elevated in these situations. And as a result, my execution, I think, is pretty consistent. This is not really an area where I feel concerned personally. I'm a little more concerned about the areas where my technical game plan is not quite as well defined at the moment. And for rare, unusual spots as well, I think this is something where I tend to outperform my opponents, and I feel good about that area. So here, I mean, I know I didn't rate myself lower than a 3, but I really just want to make sure that I have a note to myself that the 3-bet pots lack clear vision over the game plan. Now, we're really getting into mental game execution here. Thinking about the quality of your thought process, the quality of your decision making. I want you to think about how confident you feel making these types of adjustments or these types of decisions. So, imagine yourself playing the game. This isn't like, in theory, how well do you think you could describe exploitative adjustments? No, this is when you're playing, how confident do you feel that you are adjusting and that your adjustments are sound? So I would say that this is something I do well, maybe not perfect. I think what I lack here is recognition of the opportunity, not the skill set, but recognition of the opportunity could always be better. The quality of my in-game thought process when I'm hero calling or hero folding, I think that these are difficult situations, and I definitely have a bias in one direction. I won't necessarily spoil what my bias is, but I think people who watch a lot of my content probably know in which direction I might lean. But I think that the quality of my thought process in these situations could improve a lot. So the definition I'm placing on hero calling or hero folding is really just, when you're thrown into a situation that's quite outside of the box, it's quite outside of the solution, and you need to have that level of confidence that says, yes, this is a stupid looking call, or maybe this is a fold I can't make, right? When these types of thoughts start to come to mind, I think that's when you know that the quality of your thought process is not great. And I plan to address what it is that we can do to improve these types of things in some interactive seminars and some live seminars with the Discord community after course launch. So moving on to thin value betting, slow playing value. So these are, again, like different states of mind that you might find yourself in when you're taking certain courses of action. So if you can imagine the quality of your thought process when you're considering making a thin value bet, this is something I think I do quite well, actually. And I think I won't give myself a 5 because I can imagine a few scenarios where I talk myself out of a thin value bet that's just a little bit too ridiculous. And I don't necessarily want to hold myself back in those areas, but I think more than the hero calling or hero folding situations, I'm good by default at finding these and finding the opportunities to slow play value. I mean, this is again just how well is your thought process moving along? How clearly is it moving along when you're in these types of situations? Because I do think they act differently. It might be the first time you're thinking of these as separate types of thought processes, but I think they are. So when slow playing value, I think this is it's a little automatic for me. I think I could be a little more deliberate about when it's appropriate to slow play. So actually, for that reason, I'm going to give myself just a 3. Now, bluffing in big spots or bluffing in small spots. So the distinction here is when the pot is big or when the situation feels big. How clear is your thought process when it comes to running a bluff? Is there a clear bias? Are you thinking through the spot in the same way that you would think it through in a different situation? And then for small spots, I think it's also about like, do you care as much about these situations? Are you finding the same level of aggression, the same level of attachment to the pot, the same level of desire to win the pot, right? That's why I've marked these as advanced. I think these are difficult to distinguish until you give it some honest self-reflection. And I think a lot of people just kind of have their natural tendency in big pots and their natural tendency in small pots. And that is what it is. And it doesn't get the additional attention that it deserves. So I think for me, I'm actually excellent at the small pots and I struggle with the big spots. So I'm going to rate myself accordingly. And how confident do you feel making live reads or timing tells, right? These kind of qualitative decisions that are more difficult to study. This is something that I'm working on, but still don't feel super confident about. So I'm going to give myself a 3 there. So I've given myself a lot of 3s. If I'm being honest about the relative rating of all these 3s, I think these 2 are worse than that, and these 2 are the areas where my decision making work should focus. And I'm just going to make a note that live game emphasis of these situations feels different in real time. I guess let's put it that way. So yeah, this is, transitioning to playing more live from playing online. I think that these are areas that I don't want to write off as something that's just, easy or something that's just going to level itself out. So now I'm deliberately asking about mental game. These are more traditional, I think, mental game ratings that you can evaluate yourself on. And I do want to make it clear, I think these are really important things to take note of. I think these are really important areas to evaluate yourself. These are not necessarily the top priority or the main focus of what it is you're going to be working on once you get through this course. There's actually very little content in this course that specifically addresses mental game, but I do think that the methods that I use to prepare in general are supportive of a stronger mental game. And for more, I guess, deliberate mental game coaching, that's something that I usually outsource or I usually recommend, other essentially like specialists to work with those things. But I do think that just having as part of the evaluation, you're rating yourself on your skills, you're rating yourself on your theory, your knowledge, your preparedness. This is a huge component and it shouldn't be overlooked. So when we talk about tilt control, I think, it's fundamental. Obviously, if you're someone who quite literally can't control your response to bad luck or your response to unfortunate situations, then this is a big area of focus for you. I'm going to give myself a 4 here. I think that my tilt control is really good in the sense that I don't blow up in any particular way. But I think my tilt recognition could improve. I find with a lot of high level players that they like to say that they know when they tilt, but it doesn't affect their game. And I think that is basically always like like convincing yourself of what you want to be true. But I don't think that's being fully honest with yourself. I think that everyone's tilt bleeds into their game, and getting better at recognizing tilt, whether it's soft tilt or extreme tilt, whatever you want to call it, getting better at recognizing it is going to help you improve in your evaluation of how it affects like your thought process, how it affects the way that you play as a result. And the extreme versions of tilt, the very outward, like the verbal, I guess, outbursts or physical outbursts that we see from time to time from certain players, those are the obvious version. But I think that being more critical and being more honest with yourself, you can find a more hidden variety of tilt that's still important to identify and work through. What I'm calling situational awareness is kind of like it's sort of game flow, I guess, is what we used to call it. Being aware of your opponents and how they're feeling and how they're playing right now as a result of how they're feeling. This is something that in a heads-up match, I'm very, very confident about. In my current games, I think, I need to get better at taking in kind of everyone's game flow all at once, which is a little more challenging for me rather than just focusing on one opponent. And then following metagame is very similar, although I think that metagame is a little more about what's happened in the hands and a little less about how people are feeling. But again, very related, very comfortable for me in a heads-up environment, a little more challenging when there's multiple players at the table. Now this is more inward. This is a little bit of off-the-table mental game. How strong is your daily routine? I would say that mine is a work in progress. How good are you at putting in volume? I would say that, depending on what volume it is that I'm trying to accomplish, I think if you consider my coaching volume, then I'm doing great. But I think that this is an area that I'm working on and can continue to improve on a lot. And then presence and mindfulness. This is kind of like the level up, I think, from situational awareness, from metagame, from tilt control, all of this stuff. I think this is like high level ability to control your mental game and to take in all the information that's available to you. And really, this is for live players, or this is, it's certainly for online players as well. But I find this personally a lot more challenging in the live environment because there's so much downtime and there's so much time spent with yourself. And it's a lot less engaging in the way that online is engaging. And you can just I find like entering flow state a lot more natural online because there's so many decisions and you're always moving. When the pace is slower, this is for me personally, I find it's easier to get out of this state. So this is something that, again, I'm putting deliberate effort into and I think is quite valuable for any player. So rated myself lower than a 3 in putting in volume. I'm going to call this scheduling priority challenges with coaching and life. So reflecting on what we filled out here, you're going to want to identify your strengths, your skill set strengths, your skill set weaknesses. A quick example would just be going back and finding, perhaps my strengths are in consistency in the majority of these situations, consistency in pretty much all of these situations. Although the weaknesses for me seem to be in 3-bet pots. I've rated myself a 3 in technical mastery and in consistency in 3-bet pots. Well, 3-bet plus. So that's going to be, 3-bet plus pots, consistent execution. So it doesn't have to be a specific node. It doesn't have to be a specific type of skill. We're just taking note of like, what am I good at the table? What am I not so good at the table, right? Also looking at decision making. Maybe I'm not so good. Maybe I am good at, let's say, exploitative play and this kind of falls under consistency and execution, attacking small pots. So exploitative play is a decision-making strength of mine, but maybe, consistent thought process, not so much. So execution is good, but thought process, not so good. And I might even, comparing this with the mental game stuff that I talked about, I might even just consider that the slow-paced environment is a challenge for me. So I would put that into greatest weaknesses for decision-making in a slow-paced environment. And that's probably what I would like to train the most. That's a nice takeaway for me. Later in the course, I talk about translating these evaluation sheets into a study plan. And this is one of the things that I'm going to cover in that area is some ideas for training the sort of unique things that you learn about yourself, you learn about your game by going through these evaluations. So once you've gone through this yourself in all four areas, take some time to reflect on the overall themes. And I'm going to give you a format for taking those notes and converting them into a plan for moving into the study section.